Hi, everybody. It's Dr. C. We are continuing our discussion of miscarriage today, which is pregnancy loss before 20 weeks. That's the official definition. And we're specifically going to dive into what are the 5 root causes of miscarriage and is prevention really possible? So let me just give you a little bit of information to kick off our discussion. And okay, so there are 216,500,000 women who get pregnant every single year. This is equal to, sorry, one second, I have the wrong statistic here. Okay, this is equal to 13.82% of all women of childbearing age. Yes, my super baby Apollo's asking me something. Can you wait for me for just a couple minutes? Okay. All right. I'll be there in just 1 second. Okay. I'm going to finish doing this live. Super Mama Life. Okay. So there are 216,500,000 women who get pregnant every single year. Now, this is just the pregnancies that we know about. This is not the pregnancies that we don't know about. And it turns out that there are many more pregnancies that we don't know about. So this amounts to 13.82% of all women of childbearing age are getting pregnant every single year, or 5.53% of all women across all ages who are getting pregnant every single year. So that's a lot of women getting pregnant every single year. Now, that is very different from the number of births that happen every single year. So when you look at the number of births that happen, there are 140 million births that happen every single year. So what that means is that 8.97% of all women of childbearing age are having children every year. That's down from almost 14% who were pregnant in the first place. So that's a 5% difference between the percentage of women of childbearing age who are getting pregnant in the first place but going on to give birth. Okay, so now these are the pregnancies that we know about. Let's talk about the pregnancies that we don't know about, because this gives us an idea of what the true burden of miscarriage is. So there's a study that was conducted recently that showed that women in Denmark, this is a country that is always rated one of the healthiest countries in the world and has one of the best healthcare systems in the world, healthcare access for everyone. And that's not a moral judgment. That's just a rating that is given by different polling companies, etc., like Gallup, for example. So among women in Denmark, they have 1.7 live births or children on average, but they also have 2.1 miscarriages on average. So more miscarriages than live births per woman on average. And there are 24%, that's a 24% difference. So 24% more miscarriages than live births, even in one of the wealthiest, healthiest countries with great access to healthcare. Okay, so those are current data. Now, if we look at Mormon women in America in the 19th century, they had an average of 8 live births and 16.8 miscarriages, more than 2 times as many miscarriages as live births, or 110% more miscarriages than live births. That's pretty incredible when you start to look at just how many pregnancy losses are happening. And again, these are the losses that we know about. Now, let me read you an important conclusion of this study, which suggests that most human pregnancies end in miscarriage. So here is a conclusion of the study. Firstly, miscarriage is the predominant outcome of fertilization, meaning that it's more common than going on to have a baby. We know that this is true in the IVF space. For example, IVF, fertilization via IVF is much less efficient in terms of going on to have a healthy baby than natural conception. But this study is concluding that this is even the case in natural conception, that miscarriage is the predominant outcome of fertilization, meaning that it's far more common than going on to have a baby, and a natural and inevitable part of human reproduction at all ages, because this study found that women, it's not just women in their 40s who are more likely to have a miscarriage than a healthy baby. This is true of women in their 20s as well. This is true across age groups. Here's one more thing that I want to say to you or share with you from the conclusions of the study. To have a large family, it is virtually impossible to avoid multiple spontaneous abortions, which is the scientific term for miscarriage. I know it's a yucky term, but it's the official term that's used in science. Let me say that again. In order to have a large family, it is virtually impossible to avoid multiple miscarriages. What I think is really amazing about this, as a woman who has had 3 super babies and only 3 pregnancies in my life, and I had my super babies as an older woman, so you've already heard that this is the case across age groups, and even more the case as we get into our 30s and 40s as women on average. But as someone who had my super babies at 35, 37, and 40, and by the time you're 40, they say you have a 5% chance of conceiving in any one cycle, although we don't actually know where those data come from and if they're entirely accurate. But that's the thing that you hear people say, doctors say over and over again. So that I got pregnant on the first try with each of my 3 super babies, with even just one, would have been incredibly unlikely. But 2 and 3 and especially at those ages, and that I never experienced pregnancy loss. Now with these new data, I realize just how remarkable that is. And I know that I'm just an N of 1, but we have so many women and couples in our FPI village at the Fertility and Pregnancy Institute who have trimestered with us, gone on to get pregnant in their first, second, or third cycle after months or years of not being able to get or stay pregnant, and gone on to have their super babies. And I realized that this work that we do in light of these new data it's even more remarkable, the outcomes that we achieve. So I just want to say, oh my goodness, thank goodness, thank God for the Primester Protocol and the power that it gives us to be an exception to this rule, which is really, really hard and really, really painful to experience. Okay, so let's talk about the 5 main root causes of miscarriage. And I'm going to give you a summary of what those are. And then I'm going to teach you about whether prevention is possible across those or for any one of those. Okay, so the first, and this is by far the most common source of miscarriage, it is chromosomal abnormality or other type of defect. So this could be neural tube defect, for example. The second is hormones and hormonal balance or the lack thereof. The third is the immune system of the mama or infection in the mama. The fourth is structural problems, including problems with the placenta. Another example would be problems with the uterus. This could be having fibroids in a place that interferes with the growth of the baby. This could be having a septated uterus. This could be a polyp or something, an issue with the uterine lining, for example. And the fifth is other health problems in the mama. So common ones are preeclampsia, high blood pressure or hypertension, gestational diabetes. These things don't have to result in pregnancy loss, but they can be linked to pregnancy loss. Also thyroid conditions, because the baby and the pregnancy need thyroid hormone from the mama. Okay, so these are the 5 most common root causes of pregnancy loss. So over the next few days, I'm going to be going into each one of them in more detail and helping you to look at where are our points of power within each of these root causes. What can we do? What do we have control over? What do we not have control over? Where is prevention possible? So I'm going to start with the first category, which is the biggest category, because estimates are that chromosomal abnormalities and other types of defects like neural tube defects account for 60% of miscarriages. And for people who have had an early miscarriage around week 6 or even week 7 or week 8, more than likely this has been due to a chromosomal abnormality or other type of defect where the pregnancy is not progressing in a healthy or viable manner. Now, the really wonderful news about this is that there are some things that we can do to reduce the risk of chromosomal abnormalities and neural tube defects, especially neural tube defects, but through similar pathways that include hypomethylation and overcoming hypomethylation and other things, we can help to reduce the risk of chromosomal abnormalities, including Down syndrome, for example. So one of the ways that we can reduce risk of this root cause of miscarriage is, number 1, by primestering. So, and I'm going to tell you a couple of specific things within primestering that have the strongest scientific support within them in terms of reducing risk of miscarriage. Now, let me say something really important. It's very common for a doctor or person to say that miscarriage cannot be prevented. And I want to tell you that there is more nuance to this answer than is typically acknowledged. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to stop a miscarriage once it has begun. That is very true. It is also much more difficult and oftentimes impossible to stop a miscarriage or prevent a miscarriage once the pregnancy has begun, especially if it's in this first category of abnormality, chromosomal abnormality or neural tube or other defect, because that needs to be prevented prior to conception, prior to the release of the egg and the release of the sperm that will then go on to meet one another to create that embryo, to create the fetus, to create the baby. So it starts with the final process of egg maturation and the final process of sperm maturation. That's where we have the power to prevent miscarriage. We have to get in front of it. Once the sperm and egg meet, once the pregnancy has begun, and certainly once the miscarriage has begun, it is very difficult to do anything, especially when the root cause of the miscarriage is in this first category of abnormality. So your point of power is in the trimester before the egg is released, and 120 days before at least you want to begin, and before the sperm is released. And in the case of the sperm, you're looking at somewhere between 72 and 96 days. I may not have those numbers exactly right, but you still want to give yourself about 4 months there as well. So just think of it as 120 days on either side, egg side, sperm side. Now, one of the things that there's a lot of research on is the role of vitamin B9 in preventing neural tube defects and helping to protect against certain types of chromosomal abnormalities, including Down syndrome. This is true for all people, and this is especially true for people who are prone to hypomethylation and have compromised detoxification. And if you are somebody who's been told that you have the MTHFR gene, well, first of all, we all have the MTHFR gene. We all have 2 of them, in fact. But if you've been told this, then probably what that you've been told is that you have higher risk variants of these, 1 or 2 higher risk variants of this gene, which predisposes you to hypomethylation, which increases risk for fertility challenges, pregnancy complications, chromosomal abnormalities, neural tube defects, and also autism and autism spectrum disorders and ADHD and other neurocognitive challenges in children. And the good news here is that up to 70% of neural tube defects and a certain percentage of chromosomal abnormalities, Down syndrome, and as I said, autism, can be prevented through supplementation of vitamin B9. Now, it's very important to know that not all forms of vitamin B9 have been created equal. You will recognize vitamin B9 under the name of folic acid, which is how it's most commonly referred to. Yet folic acid is the most inferior form of vitamin B9. And so on a hierarchy, I would say do folic acid rather than nothing, okay? That's why we have fortified foods, to make sure that all women of childbearing age are getting enough of this vitamin, but they're getting it in the synthetic form, which is not as easily used by the body, which is called bioavailable, which needs to be processed in the liver, which can result in is hard on the liver, number 1, but also can result in higher levels of circulating folic acid, which can be linked to certain problems. So here's the deal. Here's the hierarchy. Folic acid, methylated folate, which is another one you may have heard. And then here's the most superior form, 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. This is the form that is present in your body. And so the body doesn't have to convert it. It's readily usable. It's bioavailable, bioidentical. Doesn't have to be processed by the liver. And it doesn't carry the same risks of the potential of high circulating levels of excess vitamin B9, which has, as I said, has been linked to just in one study, but it was a study that scared a lot of people, has been linked to potential problems. And so I highly recommend that you talk with your doctor about using the 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate form of vitamin B9, and know that supplementation with this nutrient can reduce up to 70, or does reduce up to 70% of neural tube defects, and can also protect against chromosomal abnormalities. And that includes Down syndrome, but also neurocognitive disorders like autism and ADHD. Now, another thing to point out is that people who, as we age, we become prone to hypomethylation. So what that means is, if you're somebody who has a higher risk MTHFR variant, or two of them, and you're getting a little bit older, what we call farther along in our reproductive span, the period within which we can have biological children, then hypomethylation might have gotten worse. Or if it wasn't an issue to begin with, it may become an issue. So it may be that people who have these higher risk MTHFR variants in the first place, as they're getting older, may need even more support. But it could also mean that even if you don't have the higher risk variants, that as you're getting older, you need more support. That's a general pattern and consequence of getting older, and the wear and tear on our body and all of our systems. Now, the last thing that I'll say is that it's really, really important to remember that if you've experienced a miscarriage or other type of pregnancy loss, it's not your fault. And I know that I know from having done this work for 27 years now that it's deeply painful. And when I come to talk to you about root causes and where our points of power are, and if there are any opportunities for prevention, that in no way means that you did something wrong or you failed in any way if you experience pregnancy loss. In fact, as you heard me say from the data I read you at the beginning of this live, actually the majority of women experience pregnancy loss, and far more pregnancy loss than actually getting to have children. So you didn't do anything wrong. And I think it's important that we do everything that we can to educate ourselves about what we can do to reduce risk. That's the very best thing that we can do, and all we can ask of ourselves. That's not to place blame on past choices, on anyone else, on anything. Pregnancy loss is a natural part of human reproduction, just like death is a natural part of human life and of life. It's so hard in both of those cases. So I'm very happy to be here sharing what's possible, because when we start putting these things into action now, in the 120 days, or even earlier, if you're a year out, 2 years out from being ready to have children, it's never too early to start. I will put a link in the comments to our shop where we have the specifically the extra neural tube and chromosomal care nutrients, including the 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate that you want to be utilizing. And I'll link that there for those of you who want and need it. For those of you who would really benefit from, love to have, need, are craving a free resource on miscarriage and pregnancy loss prevention and healing, I have created something really powerful and beautiful for you. So just put me in the comments, just me, that's all you have to do. Put me in the comments or DM me, if for your privacy, me, and we'll send it to you. Okay. I'll be back to see you tomorrow. We're going to talk about the second most common root cause of miscarriage, which is hormonal imbalance or a lack thereof. The good news is there's a lot that we can do here. All right, so I will see you tomorrow, sending you warmest wishes and sprinkling super baby dust in your direction. Meet me back here again tomorrow. Let me tell you around what time tomorrow. I believe it will be around 11 a.m. Pacific, but give me some grace, somewhere between 11 a.m. and noon Pacific tomorrow. All right, sending you love and warmest wishes, sprinkling super baby dust in your direction. I'll be back to see you tomorrow for part 3 of miscarriage prevention and healing.